Hi there, welcome to this presentation. This presentation is from Seismic Radio, and my name is Michael Schomborn. It is just a short presentation of ideas you could have for youth groups, and let's get into it. It's going to be quite long, but again, the whole purpose of this is to just give you some ideas, trying to give you a little bit of inspiration. It might be relevant to you, it might not be relevant to you. Obviously, it's up to you. Okay, why this presentation? It's very important, I think, to get youngsters engaged. Just to give you a little bit about my background, I work as a, if you're in America, college professor. If you're in England or in Europe, I'm a college lecturer. And I've been for a long time. So I've been for 25 years, 26, 7 years, around about there. So it's a long time. So all my life I've had to deal with young people, and so I understand a little bit about this. Within the church context, I haven't done a lot with young people. So again, just take this with a pinch of salt. If you work with youngsters on a daily basis, or within the church context, you may have a lot more wisdom and understanding and how to deal with them. Anyway, it's only meant to give you an inspiration. Maybe you're looking for ideas, and maybe one or two ideas which are presented here will help you. Okay, number one is it's important to get people engaged. If they are engaged, everything runs wonderful. If they're not engaged, it's very, very hard to get their attention and to get them to train them in any way whatsoever. So it doesn't matter whether it's a biblical theological training, or it's training. I teach electronics engineering, or it's an abstract subject like electronics, which has also got a practical element as well, but a lot of theory is involved. Similar to when you deal with the Bible. I've been a Christian for a long time, since I was 16, for 30 odd years. When you deal with the Bible, there's a lot of theology, a lot of dry, boring theology, potentially boring theology, but there's also a very lively aspect to it, which is your relationship with God, your relationship with Christ, dealing with other people, maybe getting active, getting involved within church activities, which don't have to be flower arranging or cleaning the pews or anything like that, but could be running a mission, running a project to proclaim the gospel, something like that. It can be quite exciting. So there are also two sides to it. Okay, let's go through this. So we need to get youngsters engaged. Also, the Bible, which may appear like a dry book, especially if you read it without guidance, without a good overall understanding. So we need to make the Bible exciting. We need to make it relevant to youngsters as well, and we need to input as much as we can into our youth, so that as they grow up, a foundation is laid, a foundation they can build on in their faith. Also, if you're a youth leader, I think it's so easy to run dry. You have to be there once a week, one night a week, and you have to present something and do something with the youngsters, and it can sort of run dry. You can run out of ideas very quickly, and maybe one or two ideas which are presented here may be useful to you, and you can do something with them. You can run with them and keep this going over a long period of time and get your youth group excited about something. But again, it's very, very difficult. I don't know whether any of these ideas are going to work. In a minute, next slide, I'm going to show you a list of these ideas, and you can just forward the YouTube video to the relevant idea. Have a look at what I have to say. Maybe it'll help you, maybe it won't. Anyway, it's just meant to be a support to you, and to give you potentially some ideas or something to go with. We need to encourage creativity. It's very, very important. I think generally in life it's important. It's something which is probably neglected. Society doesn't sort of really support it as much as it might have done 20, 30 years ago. So there's something to it to encourage creativity, and there's some ideas which sort of feed into that. There's also the aspect of, it's a term I heard many, many years ago, it's use them or lose them. So either use your youngsters, do something with them, or you're going to lose them. You're going to lose them to something else, which to them may be more exciting. But again, this is sort of the difficult thing. When you look at youngsters, you don't know whether they're born again or not. They may just be traditional Christians. They may have just been moved up the ranks in the church because the parents were going to church, or church-going people, or they're there because their mates, like in the neighborhood, they're coming to the Bible study or the youth group or whatever it is. And it's just something to do. And they may not necessarily be born-again Christian. They may have never come to a knowledge and understanding of Christ. Anyway, they're coming to us, and they are spending some time with us, and gives us the opportunity to lay some very important foundations. And maybe some stage later in life, whatever seeds are sown now will come up, and they will remember, and they will turn to Christ, and there might be heroes of faith, doing amazing things one day. We don't know, but it's important to preach the gospel in season and out of season, and to get it across to as many people as possible. Our youngsters are getting indoctrinated on the street. They're getting indoctrinated by the media. The media has got a very nefarious concept and ideas, and it's a big problem. And we need to get them to hear the gospel, to just hear the gospel. And then that's what we are coming for. Also to prepare youngsters for life in an agnostic world. Yeah. So we've got a word that is very much opposed to the gospel, very much opposed to what we understand to be the truth and what is the truth. And we need to prepare them with arguments, with materials, with ideas and concepts to stand up against it. The biggest problem is we sort of live a happy Christian life as old people, but as we raise our youngsters, we just think that they're gonna go along with everything we say. Then they grow up and they start questioning things, and justly, justifiably, and it's a good thing that they start questioning things. But they themselves haven't got the answer, and we haven't given them the answers. So we need to do this, and we need to give them the answers. We need to prepare them for a world that is opposed to God, a world that is actively fighting against the principles which we find in the Bible, and give them reasons, give them understanding, give them a vision, and give them knowledge as well. They may accept it, they may reject it. So that's one thing. But again, even if we give it to them now, between the ages of 10 and 16, and then they rebel, reject everything, we don't know what happens later in life. So when they are 25, 35, they may come back to what has been sown in the earlier stages of their life, and they may return to what they've been given. And so and it's just meant as an encouragement to you as a youth leader, even though you are sowing into their lives, and it all seems to be a wasted effort, because you look 5 years, 10 years down the line, and everything seems to be lost. You're not looking 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line, 40, 50 years down the line. So some of the stuff you've sown early in the youth may come back. Bearing in mind, it's not just us who give them ideas, but ultimately it's the Holy Spirit. It's God who is calling them. And again, God sees out of time, so he sees you sowing into their lives now, the Word of God. And it may just be when they're in their 50s, 60s, 40s, 70s, 80s, I don't know. When that seed comes up again, God sees the whole time frame in an instant, and he knows what's going to happen. So from our point of view, it's just to be faithful rather than trying to be successful. Okay, that's a little bit of a prep talk. Let's have a look at all the ideas which are here. I'm going to comment on all these ideas here, and it gives you the chance. I thought I put the slide up here, so you can see everything that's here, and you may think, yeah, that's something which would work with whatever I'm doing, and you can just forward to them and scroll down on YouTube to try and get to that section. So one of them might be building a scale model of Noah's Ark. Yeah. Again, I'm going to comment on this in a minute. Building a scale model or one-to-one model of the tabernacle. That's interesting as well. So that's what the Israelites had in the desert after they fled Egypt. Building a scale model of Solomon's temple. Okay, so there are three areas which might be quite interesting. You've got lots of information in the Bible, and you can just use it to try and replicate it. Creating a chronology of the book of Genesis, so that's not just Genesis, but any chronologies, to give people like an overview of who was living at what time together with whom, who were the contemporaries. Documenting Apostle Paul's missionary journeys as well. So again, putting everything into context, and then maybe this is a journey, this is the letters he has written, this letter was written at that part of his life, that letter at that part of his life, to contextualize the life of the Apostle Paul. And you can do this through Acts, through the letters Paul has written, the book of Acts, and also through a little bit of church history when you dig into it. Okay, creating a list of the kings of Judah and Israel, dividing them into good and bad kings. So again, just like a little bit of a theoretical exercise where you go with them and you can embroider it, paint pictures, have storylines, drama, things like that. Another one might be quite interesting, the intricacies of the universe, looking at the finely tuned solar system. There's tons of information out there, and when you look at how finely tuned the Earth is compared to what would happen if this tuning would be slightly out, is quite dramatic, and that might be something to realize that there's a designer at work and it's not all by chance. Evolution, I think, Darwinism is the biggest problem we have with our youngsters, because they grow up with this in school. They, when they go to university or higher education, they're going to hit this again and again. The media assumes this to be factual, the theory of evolution factual. And so we have got our work cut out to try and show them that creation is a realistic idea, concept, and actually, I believe it's a truth. That it can hold up with the theory of evolution, and the more evidence which we see in our environment today points towards creation than to evolution. And as a matter of fact, that evolution is a house of cards which is based on de facto zero evidence. NT research, how many times did Jesus talk about hell and heaven? I'm going to talk about this as well. It's quite interesting as well. There are phrases which are being made, but we need to get the concept across. There is a hell, and hell is real. And also there's a heaven, and heaven is real as well. And we need to look at this. We're going to talk about this in a minute. Church history, look at the 7 churches in the book of Revelation compared to church history. So it's an interesting aspect as well. Going to talk about this later. Animation project, create Bible stories with animation software. So that might be good fun as well for kids, and have something like a movie festival where, what has been produced within the youth group will be shown in a church evening, like a Saturday night or something, where people are invited and they've got like a big party time or whatever. And you just, like a Cannes Film Festival where you've got a film festival at church. Chart list on creationism. So it's not just on creationism, pretty much anything where you can create chart lists, the top 10 arguments for creation or the top 100. Chart lists why the theory of evolution cannot work, the downers, sort of a negative chart list as well. Interesting aspect might be in faith building, Old Testament prophecies which point to the coming of Christ. Interesting. And you can talk about the first coming, the first time when he was here, and the second coming. And also you can give kids the understanding of why the Pharisees didn't get it, what Jesus was doing, because they were looking at prophecies relating to the second coming, where he comes in power. And so on. And at the same time, you can also, relate to eschatology, and you can get kids to work it out, look for those scriptures in the Old Testament. And then, do a presentation, have a bit of a, puzzle, or possibly a chart list, and strongest and weakest prophecies, and, which are most outstanding and maybe less outstanding, something like that. NT research, how many miracles in the book of John, what's their significance? There are only 7 miracles. And you think, why are there only 7 miracles? And things like that. So I'm not just saying that's the one you need to go for, but there are a lot of little weird things in the Bible where you have to read a little bit behind the text that is there on the open and see what is really the purpose of the author. What did he try to convey with the thing? When you look at the Gospel of John, it's a very finely tuned document which is just loaded with the gospel message. And it might be an idea to look into this and to ask questions like, why are the 7 miracles? What does it mean, the Word of God? What is the Word of God? When you go to the first verses in John, things like that. And let the youngsters work it out for themselves and come up with ideas. Challenge question, how far is the East from the West? Interesting, we're going to look at this as well. Then a music project puts sound and music to Psalms. Okay, I'm going to talk through each one of them in a couple of minutes, so it's going to be quite a long talk, and I don't want to bore you to death, so hence the list, and you can fast forward. Right at the end, I've got a few more projects as well, project ideas. Let me just go there first, and then we will, that's the last slide, whoops. let me try and get this back on again from current slide. That's the one, further project ideas. I'm going to talk a little bit about local church history. There's some stuff where I live here in Barnsley, something I can do. And I'm sure there's almost in the West, every area has got some amazingly interesting stuff, things which happen in church history. Big personalities, big things which happened possibly during the Reformation or after. Christian personalities as well, same thing, feeds into the same thing. Gospel projects maybe, Bible camp, gospel coins, tracts, the whole evangelism aspect to plant something, do something about it and then execute the project. Production of Christian documentaries or radio shows or podcasts and maybe videos feeds in maybe with the local personalities. Gospel bicycle, I'm going to talk about this later. Research projects, surveys on what people think about biblical themes. Who do they think that Jesus was? Yeah. What do they think will happen when they die? Is there heaven? Is there hell? Stuff like that, and just ask people, get some opinions, and then discuss what can you do to try and rectify whatever people think. What message do you need to put out there? A second-hand Christian book table might be an idea. So you get asking the church around, any second-hand Christian books, and have some sort of book exchange going. Try and take the book exchange into the secular world and see whether people go for that. I'm going to tell you some stories about it as well when we get to this slide. Geocaching might be interesting, GPS treasure hunting. So you could have Bible verses or little things which are, evangelistic things which become part of the geocaching community. Or you can have your own Christian geocaching hunt, which you can publicize and let other people do this. And people can just look for these little treasures and pick something up, and you hide them in a tree or something like that. We're going to talk about this later. And web projects as well, testimony pages, evangelistic information pages, and so on. Okay, let me just go right to the beginning, and then we're going to work our way through this. Okay. So the first one is a scale model of Noah's Ark. If you're in America, I think it's in Kentucky. It's part of Answers in Genesis. Ken Ham, I think is his name. He is sort of overlooking this project. So they built a replica of the Ark, and it's actually quite an amazing vessel, very, very big. And I think you can see this down here. That's a Kentucky one. There's also a Dutch guy, and it was in one of the canals in Holland near the coast, where there was also an Ark. And I'm not sure which one it is. I think it's this one here. And this is a 1-to-1 scale model, but he also built a 1-to-2 scale model, a smaller one. I'm not sure what's happened with them. So this is years ago, and this was like the second one, and I think it's been damaged recently and so on. Okay, number one is you can go and visit it. If you're in America, organize a trip to Kentucky and plan it and go through with it, or do a virtual tour. And I'm not sure what's happened with the Dutch one. I think the entry fee was about €10 or something. I'm not sure. You need to check it out before you go there, and you also need to check out whether it's still there. It's still in the canal, but you could visit the Ark by the Dutchman who has done this. You need to do some research on it. It's just an idea I'm mentioning here. But the other thing you can do is you've got very precise information in the book of Genesis on how big the Ark should be, what should be done to it, and and so on. And you might decide to get a scale model of maybe 1 to 100. So I think it would be between 1 and 2 meters long. And sort of just design everything to scale. Or maybe go 1 to 1,000, probably it's too small then. Maybe somewhere in between 1 to 200, 1 to 300. And just translate all the measurements for the Ark into modern measurements, and get a grip on what the Ark is supposed to look like and what it looked like originally, and maybe have some groups within your church and get some materials, get bits of wood, glue, some other stuff, possibly paint to make it seaworthy and things like that. And get them to build a scale model of what the Ark might look like. And it could be a project that goes over several weeks, depending how much detail you put into it. maybe you could have the plan first and the gradually building it up, and you could make it like a church project, to later do it as a display. So again, could be a really interesting project for kids to do, to get into. Not just to see it for real and to visit one of the replicas that have been built. So there's, as I said, there's one in Europe, one in Holland. And it was on display for quite some time, but I think he has used, he put the Ark somewhere else, and he has done a tour of the Ark. And there's one in Kentucky as well, sort of one that's been rebuilt. Okay, just something to look into. I'm just trying to think anything else to say about this. I just personally, I think it's an interesting project, which might get kids excited about it. A couple of things. The Ark is designed apparently in shipping. This is what I heard a talk about some time ago, a lecture by a guy called Professor Werner Gitt. And the talk might be available in English as well. So he does talks in German and English. I heard it in German. He did a talk on this, and apparently the dimensions of the Ark are perfect for ship design. And there's like a ratio which has been built into the Ark, which was just right for ship design, to minimize the amount of rolling, to give it stability in the water and so on. I was told that these designs or these ratios are still used in modern shipbuilding. And so that's quite an interesting point maybe to point out with that. And again, you might do some tests where you use a ratio of the existing Ark and, the one that's in the Bible, and then change the ratio slightly, make it a bit narrower or a bit broader, and then do some testing on water, like a project, and see how they behave in the water. And you should find that, when you create some waves and so on, you can do this in a pond or somewhere else, that the Ark design should fare best compared to other designs, which where the ratio is narrow, a bit more narrow, or a little bit broader. So that might be, again, an interesting project. The other one, which I think would be quite a good idea, is you get all these old measurements, like a cubit, an L, and so on. So what is a cubit? And what is a foot? Again, modern kids think in centimeters, and if you're in America, possibly in inches, and you still use feet. But where do these measurements come from? And then just compare them to what we have today. And there are certain physical measurements which seem to be a lot better. For example, I think a cubit, there's an Egyptian cubit and a Babylonian cubit. There's also the theory that people in before the flood the stature was a lot bigger. They were a lot bigger than what we are today. So the ship might be a lot bigger than what we think it is, because all these old measurements are based on body measurements. So again, that might be an interesting point as well to discuss and to cover with this design. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next project. So this is a scale model of the tabernacle, and you can do it 1:1, 1:10, 1:100. Again, it's a story in Exodus, and it's been built in the desert, and you've got a fairly good description of the tabernacle as well. Almost a whole book full of them, and there's a lot of symbolism in it, in the tabernacle. Now, that symbolism leads all to the concept of grace, salvation, divinity, who God is, and you get a lot of the symbolic in and around it. Now, I'm not an expert in this, and it's just an idea, and it's an idea to get kids busy, and then, in an ongoing project, talk about the symbolism. There are some people out there in the Christian community who are experts on the tabernacle. There's one guy, and I think that's all he talks about. It's a German preacher, and I was quite amazed, what is in there. I never thought about it. I thought, it's just in English, I think it's also referred to as a tent of meeting. It's a tent of meeting. It's that the presence of God was in those days, or if you do a model where it's supposed to be, and that's all it is really. Yeah. But again, you can use this to illustrate the symbolism, to make it a vivid, a big display, for people to come to have a look at it. If you read the Bible, it'll be interesting to see what it looks like for real, what the dimensions are, and to get a feel of what it was like, and what it would have been like in the desert, where the Israelites were. It might be an interesting display for the church community. It might be something which you could make a big thing out of it. I'm going to give you a case study here. That was in Breckerfeld in Germany. There's a Bible school in Germany, and they made a big thing out of this tabernacle. And actually a lot of people, and I was there when they had set it up, and I just wanted to check it out and look at it. And they had like tours about the tabernacle, and they were explaining the symbolism within the tabernacle. I think this is one of those leaflets which describes everything about the tabernacle. And you could possibly, if you've got some land behind the church, which has got the appropriate size, you could possibly set something up, similar to the tabernacle, the original tabernacle, or the same, a one-to-one model, and people could just have a walk around and see this. Now, when I was in Breckerfeld, there were people from all over the country who just came to see this model, this one-to-one scale model. And it was just sort of an exciting thing for them to check it out and to see what it looked like. When I saw the way they put it together, it was okay, and it was good, and you could see this. I'm just looking at this one here. I'm not sure whether this one is the one in Breckerfeld or somewhere else. It doesn't look like it because there aren't trees. This one I'm sure is the one in Breckerfeld. But again, you could just set it up, you could build it up, people could go check it out, you could make it a big project for the church, and also attract a lot of interest from other churches who would come to visit it, and even make it like a bigger of a local attraction. And then when the summer is over, you could just take it all down, put it in a box, and then a couple of years later possibly build it back up again, and have the tabernacle or the tent of meeting, have it back up. This is also what Breckerfeld does, is so they put like a small scale model, and you can actually, they put it in a suitcase, and so you can rent it from them. And so if you preach on the tabernacle and on the symbolism, there are all these pillars and they stand for something. There is obviously the sacrifice stands for something. There's the Ark of the Covenant and all the other bits, and they all have got a very, very important significance, and they all stand for something. The choice of color stands for something, the cherubs and so on. So you can talk about this, and you can talk about the symbolism and relate it to the New Testament. And they do have actually a small suitcase which you can rent, I think, or why not make one yourself, a small scale model, and then again sort of highlight the symbolism. It might be very interesting. It might be a good project. It can turn into something really big. There's something where the Ark of the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, has been set up at night, and if you have a big gas flame, you can have quite a lot of fancy effects around it and make it very, very interesting. Okay, anyway, moving on. Solomon's Temple. Build a scale model. Again, there's a lot of information about Solomon's Temple, and you can potentially build a scale model of that, and similar to the Ark of the Covenant. So again, there's lots of information in the Bible of what it looks like. So you get kids and youngsters to read the Bible. It might be an interesting project for the church as a whole. It could be a permanent display. It would also get sort of a link to Israel, which I think is important. The whole meaning of Jerusalem, returning of Christ. Also the nasty bit that we read in the Bible, that the Antichrist is going to, put up shop inside the temple that is going to be built. But the main thing is you get the Bible alive. You make it much more significant, and you get some sort of understanding of what the scale of this temple was. I'm not sure about the temple of Herod, which was the second temple. What the temple looked like, Herod built. I think there are some images of that available, or some drawings or something, but I think the Temple of Solomon is more interesting. I've got a feeling when the next temple is going to be built in Israel, it's going to be built according to the information that's in the Bible, not what was done 2,000 years ago. Right, forget about the chronology down here. This is just supposed to show you. I got the history of Rom. I thought it was something else, and I accidentally put this picture in here. But that's what it could look like. And what you get is, you get like, this is what I wanted to point out with this diagram, this graphic. When you've got a graph like this, you can sort of illustrate who was contemporary to whom. And there are quite a few valid questions. You know, Noah and Adam, how much was between them? So what was the timeline between them? Were they? I think there was only one generation between Noah and Adam. So that means, I think Noah's father knew Adam. Yeah. So both of them were around of the same time. So theoretically, you could have seen him, could have known him, spoken to him. So the gaps between generations before the flood weren't that big. So most of the people who were around at that time of the flood, they would have had a good chance to at least know somebody who's met Adam personally, or even have met him personally. Yeah. So that's quite an interesting point as well to make, that it helps to sort of get like a visual representation of the Bible stories. So you could obviously carry on. You could have a look at the prophets, you know, Jeremiah and Isaiah. So how far were they apart from one another? How many years was between them? All the different kings and the prophets as well, between the different kings. Obviously, there's tons of stuff available in the Bible, but you could get kids to make a display and you know, get some charts on the internet maybe, which are already made, and compare them, make sure that they are right and that they tally up with what's written in the Bible. And you could have like a big banner which goes across one wall of the church, where you can see all these people and contemporaries and what was going on at what time, in what period. And this could go all the way from Adam to the time of Christ. Yeah? And people could just go along this banner and just have a look at what's there. And this is something you do in the youth group. Yeah? And also you could take it one step further. You could maybe look at historical figures in the world. So look at the Roman Caesars and emperors, and which emperors were around during the lifetime of Paul and of John. And then we could look maybe at the church fathers as well, where you look at Origen or Clement or others, Irenaeus, Augustine, people like that, who had quite a big influence on the church. And you could sort of see Constantine, for example, a big figure where suddenly everything changed, not necessarily for the better. But you could see sort of how these characters move in. And then you could have maybe big events like the Reformation, look at Martin Luther and see what was going on and when he was around, the thesis on the church, split of the church, the beginning of the Protestant church, when did John Wesley live, John Bunyan, and so on. So you could do this whole thing, maybe cover all the walls of the church with a big paper roll, which you use to do this, and then you just stick it on the wall, and you would have like a really important document which would put everything into context. The problem for a lot of kids is they read through the Bible and they don't understand. They read the prophets, but they don't understand in which time period it fits in. And we've got tons of information. We've got Chronicles, Kings. We have got the books of Samuel, which give us a lot of stories about David and so on. We have got obviously Judges, Joshua, all this period, which is down there as well. And then we've got prophets as well who fit into particular periods in the Bible. But obviously, reading through the prophets, we don't necessarily know when they were there. So it sometimes helps to have this timeline and to get this whole bit of history, this chronology, visible somewhere. So, for example, if kids come to church and they're a bit bored and they're just reading something in the Bible, you encourage them to read the Bible, which you should do. That they just need to have a glimpse on the wall and they know, aha, Jeremiah lived at this time. Isaiah, yeah, they were both together and they lived then and then. And you could then sort of look at the whole thing in context as well. Okay, what else have we got? We've got, yeah, move on, next one. Apostle Paul's missionary journeys as well. So we have got the book of Acts, where we read an awful lot. Then we've got the letters of Paul, and he talks a little bit about, the places where he's been and what he's been doing. And then, as I said, like before, the book of Acts sort of splits or stops in the middle of nowhere. Yeah? So you read the last sentence in the book of Acts and you think, and, something is missing here. Where's the end of the story? And I think the implication is, it's implied that the book of Acts doesn't finish. It finishes when Jesus comes back, when he takes us home, when the age of the church is finished. And I think we've got like this church history which goes through there, and it's maybe just a point you could make. But the important thing is you've got all these letters, we've got 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. Where do they come in, We know Paul went to Corinth, we know he went to Athens. What period of his life did it all take place? And can we put those letters in somewhere? And do we have some information about Peter? When did Peter write his letter? Was it towards the end of his life or letter apart? Can we take some information from there? What does the church history say? In what decade he was writing this? And the Gospels as well, we've got lots of information when they first appeared, and that was quite early. So we might put all this stuff, on this this timeline as well. Or, as far as Paul is concerned, you could just have something about Paul where you, like a map we've got here, where you can see his missionary journeys, and you can possibly, allocate letters or information about his journeys, and have like this line, he went from there to there, this is what happened when he was there, and so on. And again, so what you get people to do and youngsters to do is you get them to look in the book of Acts. You get the line of this journey, and for each point where he was, you can tell a little bit of a story of what he was doing at certain places. And this will help to put the Bible into context. Yeah, and have to confess, obviously I've read Acts many times over. I've read there's also a really good film as well. It's the Visual Bible. They've got something on Acts. So you can make a film evening to start off with, where you just watch the story of Acts or part of it, and then you could create a timeline on like a journey line and little stories of what happened where he was. And again, you could use a similar thing. We just use a paper roll and you put all the towns there, and then you write down in bullet points, this is what he was doing here, this is what he was doing there, and just some, little bits, and then possibly look at some scriptures of some of the letters he has written. When are they most likely to fit in? A lot of work has been done already, but it's just a matter of visualizing it and giving kids an idea of what happened when and how this all fits together. The advantage will be, so when you do this exercise with them, the one day when they read through the Bible, it'll all drop into place. And there will be this aha moment. Yeah, aha, this is when this was happening. This is when this was happening. This is the reason why I wrote this to the Corinthians. This is the second brief to the Corinthians, and the second letter to the Corinthians, and so on. Yeah, this is when he ended up in Rome, and this is what he did in Rome, and you can sort of give them a time frame. Okay. Creating a list of the kings of Judah and Israel. Again, we're talking about chronology, but you could just put a timeline down, and there are some timelines available, and just get kids to draw some pictures and to draw a timeline, maybe a little bit of a storyline as well, and you could divide them into good and bad kings as well. So it's all about chronology. It's all about putting stuff into context. Okay. Completely different story and completely different way of looking at it. So this is just looking at the universe and what's going on. And this might be ideal in winter time when it's dark early at night, and it's fascinating. Get a telescope, which are not very expensive, and if you've got a clear night, show them the rings of Saturn. Work hard, you can get apps for that where Saturn is, and show them the rings of Saturn. Jupiter, you can actually see the moons around Jupiter very, very easily. So telescope, and then you'll see Jupiter itself, and you sometimes can see the spot as well with a very simple and cheap telescope, and you can see the moons as well. And it's really fascinating when you do this and when kids can see this as well. I once did it with a friend of mine, and we went to over here in the Pennines late at night. It was winter, not late at night, but sort of 8, 9 o'clock. We went to a place where there was very little street light or light of towns, and it took some time. And once your eyes got used to it, and it was a very little moonlight as well. I think it was a new moon night, and it was a clear sky, which here in England is not very often. But anyway, once your eyes got used to it, suddenly it just opened up, and the heavens opened up, and you could see, I would say, thousands of stars. Maybe it was millions. And anyway, we looked at some bright stars, and we just no idea. We didn't. This was the day before the smartphones arrived, so we didn't have any apps. So we didn't know. I didn't know what was where. But we just saw a bright star in the sky. We ripped the telescope to it. It took some time to try and find it, and it happened to be Saturn. And I said, Jason, have a look at this. Have a look at this. And I can see the rings. This is Saturn. I can see the rings around Saturn. And so he had to look through that, and he could see the rings of Saturn as well. And it was quite interesting. We did a few other bits as well, and then we had some problems with the telescope, and the lenses sort of messed up with dew that was falling down, and we packed up and we went home. But years later, he was still telling me that this was one of the most exciting moments in his life when he saw the rings around Saturn through a telescope. And I'm sure this could give quite some real experiences to kids, and also to tell them about the creation of God. Now, when you look at the universe, you can look at the position of the Earth, and a little bit further out, everything would be frozen. A little bit further in, everything would be steamed up. We would have like a lot of steam, water steam, but no oceans. The Earth, no moon. The Earth would spin around so fast that probably we would have storms that couldn't consist life, and days would just be an hour long. Then the only moon that shows its face to the side of the Earth all the time. So the moon has got a rotation, but it doesn't rotate towards the Earth only as it goes around the Earth. Yeah? So we get like this day and night and the different phases of the moon. Doesn't happen anywhere else in the universe. When you look at the size of the moon from the Earth, it's exactly the same size as the sun. And one example is the solar eclipse, when the moon moves in front of the sun and it just covers it 100%. Most of the moons in which we've got, they rotate the same direction, so they're spinning the same direction. And again, you have to research on this. I know for one for certain, I think it's around Jupiter. And there are a couple of other moons as well, and they spin the opposite way around. And this doesn't make any sense whatsoever when you believe in the Big Bang theory, because you have something which is called angular momentum, and all the moons, all the planets, all the orbital objects should all spin around the same way. It doesn't happen. Scientists call this the anomaly, and they haven't got an explanation for it either. We have got an explanation. It's just the creator having a bit of a laugh and trying to confuse the scientists. Confound the wise. That's what it's all about. Okay, and then obviously the heavens declare the glory of God. So that's a thing, and it can be quite exciting. So it might be something for the winter month, especially when you've got a night where you've got a clear sky. If you are in America, it happens quite often, depending where you are. If you are in England, it doesn't happen very often. But maybe, as an option, have some telescopes there, and you don't need anything sophisticated, and you can do this. And whilst I'm saying this, there's also the moon. You don't need a very big telescope. Something a little bit better than binoculars with a bit more magnification. Even binoculars work as well. You can actually see mountains and valleys on the moon, and it works best not when there's a full moon, but when you've got like a half moon or something. And where you can see best is between the day and night region on the moon, because the sun casts big shadows on and over craters, and they become very visible. So that's the best way to see this. So that might be a project as well, where you just set up a little bit of an observatory, and get kids to watch the moon, get kids to have a look at Saturn and Jupiter. Mars can be interesting as well, the red planet. Venus tends to be just a white blob, so it's not that interesting. Mercury, very hard to see. Health and safety warning as well, make sure nobody looks into the sun, it'll blind them. Don't use, only use it when the sun is down, and then it might be something to look into. You can, depending on what the degree is, but you have to look out for that. You can see and look at galaxies as well. So you get like the spiral form, and you can sometimes make out the spiral, but you need quite a good telescope for that. Okay. Evolution versus creation. Next one. It's probably one of the biggest challenges we are dealing with as the church. And we have only started very late to start fighting the lies of Darwinism. And it all started about the mid-1800s. And I think it took about the mid-1900s until we started going against this and moving science in a way to prove creationism and disprove the theory of evolution. Okay, just my personal background, same as most people today. I grew up believing in the theory of evolution. I became a Christian. I still believed in the theory of evolution. And then some old granny who loved the Lord with all her heart, and I visited her every time and every now and then, and she was part of the church. I was just a young nipper, 16 years old, and anyway, her argument was for evolution and creation. We came talking about this, and I thought, oh, she's just a very simple-minded lady, and I've been to the educational system and got all the scientific stuff, but her argument was very simple, and he said, why should Jesus lie to us, about creation, and about Adam and Eve, and it kind of stuck with me, and I thought, yeah, that's right, why should he lie? And I started sort of getting into all this, and I looked a little bit behind the scenes, and it took me years later. I spent maybe a year or so to just looking into the theory of evolution and how weak it is. And the more I looked into this, the more I saw that evolution has got no leg to stand on. And there was still, I believed in creation, fairly shortly after this conversation with this old lady. And I was looking into this whole thing later on, years later, but I still believed in it. But I sort of tried to avoid it because I thought that the arguments for evolution were really, really strong. And I wouldn't have anything to put against it, even though I didn't believe in it. I didn't want to believe in it at the time. But what I sort of saw over time, the more I got into it, that evolution is really weak. It's not got a leg to stand on. All the systems the theory of evolution is based on they're just empty things. There's just one assumption which is being made, and then the next assumption builds on the first assumption, and so you've got like just assumptions, very weak concepts which are based on another weak concept without any proof whatsoever, and then they come up with this sophisticated, phenomenal concept of the theory of evolution. When you take the first assumption away, and that's very easy to do because there's no evidence for it, the whole thing just breaks down. It's a bit like, this is what I felt later. It's like a house of cards, and all you need to do is get to one of the cards at the bottom and flick it. And you can do this with your little finger, and the whole concept just falls in on itself. And nothing stands up anymore. Creationism is very different. Obviously, there's no ultimate proof I can provide, but we have got the story of creation. When you look at the evidence that's around in the world, the layers in the earth, yeah. Other evidence we've got dinosaur remains and human remains together, found in the same place. We have got seashells on top of Mount Everest and things like that. They're just little things, but all they tell us is that evolution doesn't work. All the concepts with geology and everything else, they just don't work with these big time spans they have, because everything would have just been eroded. The seashells on top of Mount Everest, they would have been eroded away, and so we can find that there's much more evidence for creationism, and it's a lot stronger, and it actually stands the test of time, and also the burden of proof is much easier to find with creationism than with evolution. Evolution, there's nothing there. It's really empty. I heard the example, if you go into a cabin in the middle of the wilderness and you find a burning candle, there are a couple of things you don't know. You don't know how long the candle has been burning, but you know it's not going to be 100 years. So it might have been burning an hour, it might have been burning a day, because you don't know how big it was to start off with. You might be able to tell a little bit, but it's very difficult. But you know that somebody was here recently, and that somebody has lit the candle, and that this is not that long ago. It's not 1,000,000 years ago, it's not 1,000 years ago. It's probably a day ago, maybe an hour ago, maybe a minute ago. And that's a little bit of the situation we have got. We find a lot of these burning candles throughout creation, throughout the world, where we can tell something has happened quite recently. And that is sort of the basis of the evidence and of interpreting the evidence which we have got. So anyway, it's important to go through this. There are a couple of resources. There's one guy called Kent Hovind. He was very active a few years ago. I hope there's still internet videos available of him. It's all copyright. He doesn't give a hoot about copyright. So you can copy whatever videos you find, whatever audio you find. There's also Answers in Genesis. Should be Answer, not Answers, not Answer. Answers in Genesis by Ken Ham. He's the guy who built he had the replica of the Ark built, and I think it's in Kentucky somewhere. Again, these guys are all, people shout and scream, they're not scientific, and they are opposing science, it's just faith-based and so on. And on the contrary, when you read some of the stuff you find in Answers in Genesis, they are very scientific treatises on this subject. Again, when you look at the use we've got today, we need to try to let them know about this stuff. We need to let them know about creationism. We need to let them know that there is this whole, I would call it, scientific branch out there, which looks at the evidence we have got and just interprets them in a different manner, and a manner which is much more coherent than what evolutionists do. Okay, move on. NT research. This is an interesting subject as well. How many times did Jesus talk about hell and heaven? And we've got two answers here, and one of them is probably just pick up the concordance and look how many times hell is mentioned, how many times heaven is mentioned. And the guy's right, So to be fair, I didn't check it. I could check it in a minute, but he's probably right. Let's put it this way. Whoever's written this, did Jesus really talk about hell more than heaven? And hell 12 times, heaven 130 times. And the reason for heaven 130 times, the expression kingdom of heaven is mentioned many, many times in the Bible, and that bumps up the number. But he didn't really talk about heaven and getting there. We've got another argument here as well. So we've got 1,850 verses in the New Testament that something was cut off here. I'm just trying to look what does it mean? That are Jesus' words? Not sure what this word means there. Anyway, 13% of them deal with the subject of eternal judgment and hell. In fact, Jesus spoke more frequently about hell than he did about heaven. Okay, so 13% of the content in the New Testament deals with eternal judgment and hell. So it's quite relevant. But my question to you is, do you hear 13% of the sermons when you go to church, are they about hell? When you go to a crusade or an evangelistic outreach meeting, do people talk about hell? And this might be something quite interesting for youngsters to get into. Confront them with these two statements, and then let them find out who is right, who is wrong. And let them do a little bit of digging in the Bible. So they can do this with BibleGateway.com, where you run little searches and you can look at different scriptures. Try and make them aware that the word hell is not necessarily mentioned. It could be about condemnation. It could be about gnashing of teeth, things like that, which talk about the same thing but don't use the word hell particularly. But he still talks about hell. So what is the truth about this is an important point. Common statement is that Jesus spoke more about hell than heaven. That's said very often, it's quoted very often. Is it true? Because some people say, no, it's not true. And then the main thing is not as easy as to look up a concordance and to count the terms heaven and hell, but you could do it as a project, and just guide them a little bit and say, look, don't just look at heaven and hell at the words, but look, what is he actually saying? And then maybe look at other terms as well, like condemnation, condemn, or gnashing of teeth, where the worm will not die, and things like that. The important thing, though, is we need to get across that the reality of Christ and the reality of salvation is not just a happy-go-lucky thing, but it's not just about having a better life, but it's about avoiding hell. Hell is real. Jesus warns of that. He's worried about it. He's concerned about it. He doesn't want you to go to hell. And that is sort of important. It's a horrible place. It's a place where you don't want to be. We cannot let you go to this church and not talk about hell. We need to talk about hell. We need to let you know there's this alternative reality where you're going to end up if you don't come to Jesus. So it doesn't happen today anymore. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that was probably one thing. They talked too much about it. And people were very much aware of it as well. They were very much aware of their own sin, their own mortality, the sinfulness, and you didn't need to tell somebody or explain to somebody that he or she is a sinner. People knew that they were sinners. That wasn't a problem. You needed to make them aware. It's not about trying to live a good life, but it's trying to receive salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. That is really the message you had. Today they just get this message, but most people don't understand, why do I need to have salvation? Why do I need to get saved? And they haven't got any understanding why I'm okay. I haven't murdered anybody. I'm not a sinner. And yet even, if you use the Ten Commandments, everybody is a sinner. We have failed in every aspect of that. First commandment, using the name of God in vain. Who hasn't done it? Make youngsters aware of the need. Okay, salvation and reality of heaven and hell. Okay, very, very important stuff. And a lot of people might say, oh, I'm not going to come here anymore, but it's about the truth. We need to convey the truth. Church History Project, and this is Revelation chapter 2 and 3. We've got these 7 churches: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. And it seems that these 7 churches stand for different church movements in the last 2,000 years. We've got Ephesus as the first church, Smyrna, the persecuted church, Pergamos, where the world and the church were married together. Thyatira, we've got the Catholic Church, often referred to. Sardis, the Protestant church. Philadelphia, the Evangelical Church. Laodicea, the end-time church. So, interesting as well, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos. Jesus doesn't talk about it, about his coming when he comes. Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea talks about the return of Christ. So these churches are going to be around. Today we can clearly identify the Catholic Church, we can identify the Protestant Church, we can identify the Evangelical Church, and we've also got a Laodicea Church, which is something that's just come up in the end times. There were real churches in the old days, and they all had problems. They were all in Turkey, in this part of Turkey. So they all had problems and they all had issues. Some of the towns have got different names today. Some of the names are still similar to what they were before. And there's still ruins there which come back from 2,000 years ago. So you can still see some evidence of what was going on a long time ago. And you could make like a photo montage of these different churches, what happened, in the context of their own time. You can apply this to the Christian life to some extent. I think we've all got issues which feed into any of these churches here. But then you can also look at the church history of what is going on. Chuck Missler once said, he's a teacher I love to listen to. He's with the Lord now, but he made a point and he said, any of these churches, if you put them in a different sequence, it wouldn't work out anymore. So the parallel to church history as we can see it with the benefit of hindsight, it just wouldn't work. If any one of them would be in a different order, like Thyatira and Pergamos, if they were reversed. It just wouldn't work. But the way they've been arranged, we can clearly see church history, the whole 2,000 years described with these churches. And try this. Have a look and look a little bit at church history. The Pergamos church, and then you got the Orthodox and the Catholic Church. I mean, both going in similar directions. You got the Reformation, and they messed up big time as well. Philadelphia as well, and then we've got Laodicea, the end time church, where prosperity gospel and all that, and it just fits in 100%. And it's never, there's a movement which came sort of middle of last century, the 1900s, which has never been there before. Christianity has never been about getting rich and living a good life. Never, ever. Suddenly it was there, and you've got Laodicea. Oh, I'm rich, I don't need anything. I'm okay. I'm fine, I don't worry about anything. And what has God got to say to them? You're lukewarm, you're neither here nor there. Okay, right. So you can do a lot about this. You can look into church history, describe about this. Pergamos is interesting as well. It talks about the seat of Satan, which was the temple of Zeus. I think about 100 years ago it was dug up, and they put it in the museum in Berlin. And you could actually make, you could take especially if you're in Germany, you could take your church or the youth group to the seat of Satan, have a look at the temple of Zeus. Or you could just do, like a photo montage of some sort or another where people can actually see what the seat of Satan looks like. So this makes real sense, of what was happening. Laodicea as well, you still get some, they unduck a lot of stuff from Laodicea. And you can see they had a big promenade, and you could go there on the promenade. You'd if you let your imagination go a little bit, you can see all the posh and fancy houses either side of the promenade, and you can just imagine people who were very rich and who became rich through trade would just show their opulence and their riches and take the wife, take the husband, and just walk down the street and show everything is good. I'm rich, I've got it all. Look at me, and the show of their nice clothing and the nice embroidery and all the rest of it. You can almost see this when you look at the avenues. The promenade they had in Laodicea. And this is, they've undug this, they've done a lot of archaeological work, and you can find pictures on the internet of that, and you can do a photo montage, maybe a slideshow, maybe a presentation. I've done a presentation some time ago. If you go to Seismic Radio, you can see a presentation on each of these churches, and also what is left of it today, of those towns, and what you can see of it today. I didn't latch on to the Pergamos thing, the seat of Satan, the temple of Zeus. And it might be worthwhile, again, I'm thinking about it, to talk about the seat of Satan, which is no longer in Pergamos, but it's actually in Berlin. I don't know whether there's any significance to it, or something is going to happen in Berlin in the end times, but the seat of Satan is now Berlin, is no longer Pergamos, because they took the temple of Zeus and moved him over to Berlin. Okay, right, move on. Next one. Animation project, Bible stories. Okay, so kids into computers. You might have some laptops which you could use for this. Could be old laptops. There's tons of software. There's Linux software. If you use Linux, you tend to get away with lower hardware than with Windows 10 or Windows 7. Have a look at distrowatch.com for good Linux distributions. You can install them. They are free of charge. You don't have to pay any copyright fees or license fees or anything. You can install them on computers, which you may get, old laptops, which you may get from the church. Give them to the kids, get some animation software, and then just encourage them to create some Bible stories and animate them as much as they can. And some of the software is very intuitive. There's some stuff where you can create moving GIFs as well. So you take photos, you can then line them up, and you can turn them into a moving GIF, and you can get sort of movements of that. I'm not sure whether it's working, but it might be something to look into, to see what can you do with software to communicate the gospel. It could be animation software, it could be some other software. Could just be box standard videos that you replay in drama, Bible stories, and film them, stick them up on YouTube or Rumble, good alternative to YouTube, and maybe make a Cannes festival, which I talked about earlier, in your church, where you just have like a film premiere, where you show all the short films and talk a little bit about the message which is contained. I mean, good story would be the story of Gideon, the story of Jericho, Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. Things like that, might be quite interesting to do and sort of bring the Bible alive, and get everything incorporated. Do the drama bit, maybe do that should be interesting as well. Do an audio version of it, like a radio program, where you've just got audio to bring the Bible alive. Have the story of Gideon dramatized somehow, and then create a little audio studio and make it a festival for the ears rather than for the eye. Again, it's just ideas I'm trying to, obviously, if you've worked with youngsters, to give you some ideas to get going somehow. Okay, chart lists. Okay, that doesn't have to be about creationism. It could be about anything. You could talk about the best, strongest prophecies, strongest end-time prophecies. In this instance, I'm banging on about creationism and evolution because I think they're really, really important. And we need to get our kids to understand that the Bible is true, reliable, that it's a divine book. There's also, again, like a lot of prophecy in the Old Testament confirming the New Testament. And a lot of prophecy, even in the New Testament, speaking into the times where we are now. So we've got in Daniel that people are going to and fro, and what does this mean? Yeah, today, air travel. Never happened before, Go back 100 years, and the average person would just travel 2 or 3 miles outside their village. Most likely. Very few people did travel. There, Daniel, it says that all the people are going to and fro. Big question, who has flown today in our age? And you will probably find that the majority of people know what an aeroplane is. Majority of people have been more than 2 or 3 miles outside the town where they were born. And probably the majority of people have left the country, where they were born as well. By plane, by car, by ship. And that used to be just a privilege of a few people when you go back hundreds of years ago. I mean, we had navigation, which is a long time, but it wasn't many people who were engaging in navigation, going by ship or traveling by ship. Okay, so there are prophecies, Old Testament pointing into our day and age. We've got the 2 witnesses in Jerusalem, which witness against the Antichrist, and they've got power to do all sorts of stuff, and people are tormented by them. They are there for quite some time. Antichrist comes, kills them. Everybody sees it. People are happy that these guys have now been dealt with. And they send presents to one another. And again, Roman Empire wouldn't have been possible because the message from Jerusalem to Rome would take at least 4 or 5 days to get it there, on a fast runner, fast horse. So by that time, God would have taken them up and there was no time for people to send presents to one another. Okay, today, possible, instant communication. I can see now what is going on the Western Wall in Jerusalem. I can see it. I just need to go into the webcam and I can see it right now. If there's a big event happening in Israel or in Damascus or in Tehran or anywhere in the world, I probably see it on the news within minutes. I've got friends in Russia, Ukraine, in America. If I want to send them a present, I could do this straight away. All I need to do is go online, go on eBay, flower shop or whatever, send them a present. Present's going to be there next day. So today it's all possible. In the days of John, when John was prophesying this, it was just crazy. Probably over centuries they thought, what is this supposed to mean? It's impossible, it can't happen. Today, yes, no problem. Chart lists as to why the theory of evolution cannot work. So doubt in the theory of evolution. And it's very easy to do because they haven't got any substance. There's no evidence. The evidence is missing. They're talking about the missing link between ape and man because obviously there isn't one. So they have to make one up. Years ago I heard somebody saying that evolution happens in sudden stages. Why did he say this? And this was on BBC Radio 2, I think, and it was quite a few years ago. And I was listening to it on the way to work, and I thought, oh, that's funny. and he said because they don't have the links between the species. There's no continuous transition from one species to another. They've got one species, they've got another species. The bones look like this, the bones look like that. There's nothing in between. So that made him come to the conclusion that the process of evolution happens in sudden stages. There are sudden bursts of evolution. Why? Because the evidence for transitional species doesn't exist. Creationism, they were never created. Yeah? God created them, they created species. One species or one kind cannot mate with another kind, and you don't get sort of in-betweeners. You get variations, but that's just adaptation, so-called microevolution, which is still within the species or within the kind of each type of animal. So anyway, that might be a thing as well. Just and again, when you listen to Ken Ham or Ken Tovit, there's tons of stuff out there, tons of stuff. Yeah, and we need to convey this information. Maybe you have like a film evening where you just look at a slide from Ken Tovit. The guy is a little bit. It's my opinion. The first time I saw him, he came across a bit obnoxious and a bit. I don't know. I didn't warm to him very easily. I'm a bit of a hippie. He is like a straight-cut, straight-laced sort of guy, and there straight away there was a little bit of a maybe a character clash. But as I got to know him and I've seen a lot of his stuff, I've seen him talk about a lot of things. I came to appreciate his work. He has gone through a pretty rough time. They tried to do him for tax evasion. He ended up in prison. He was later released because the charges were unsubstantiated, as far as I understand. He had a lot of tragedy in his life. So, but that's sometimes the price you pay when you stand for the gospel and when you try to make a point and to preach truth. There's a cost to be paid, but he has done amazing work, and just listen and maybe have a video evening of some of the stuff he has done, and it's quite interesting, very, very interesting. Okay. Old Testament prophecies which point to Christ, loads of them out there. They reckon it's somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 prophecies. I think the official figure is about 2,000, but it depends how you define this. And how far you look at this. There's the first, for example, the first names in the Bible, the male names in the Bible. When you put them all together, they actually tell the gospel story. And you could say it's a prophecy towards Christ, but I'm sure it's not classed within in the 2000. But there's a lot of it. So we look at Isaiah, we look at Psalms, and a lot of stuff which points to the crucifixion and what was going on at the crucifixion, which is not even written down in the Gospels, but it clearly relates to this time, refers to this time. There are also a lot of prophecies about the second coming of Christ in the Old Testament, which obviously hasn't happened yet. But it's interesting. So it might be worthwhile to try and get them to work out, and then get kids to write all the Bible verses, and then have a cross as a symbol of Christ somewhere, and then have a look at all these prophecies and draw lines to what event and what they are pointing to. Maybe look also in the New Testament where Old Testament scripture is quoted, and then see the link from there as well to the Old Testament. Again, when you look at the Bible, it's a self-proving book. So if the Bible talks about events in the future and then the events happen and take place, then you've got an element of proof in there that there's divine inspiration. There's no other book in the world, religious book in the world, that's doing it, with maybe a couple of things. I mean, few things point here and there, but not with the degree of precision as the Bible is doing it. And so we can prove the authenticity of the Bible by just looking at Old Testament prophecies pointing to New Testament events, history, and even going further, we've got New Testament prophecy which are pointing to current events, like the talking image and things like that, which today we know what it is. Okay, move on. Miracles of the Gospel of John. There are a lot of peculiarities in the Bible. So, for example, and I stumbled over it at one stage, and I was reading the Gospel of John, and to be fair, I'd read it for many, many years, and it's one of my favorite Gospels. Even before I became a Christian, I read the Gospel and couldn't make head or tail with it, but I read it and I thought, this is important, I need to read this. And one day it just dawned on me, there aren't many miracles in John. There's a lot of theology in there, but not many miracles. And then I counted them. I counted only 7 miracles, and I was doing a bit of research on this, and I was quite impressed. And when you look at the miracles, they almost tell a story, a theological story, and we see all these things which are going in, and it might be interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of work has been done on this, but to just let kids look at these stories and encourage them to try and find out why this is the case. What is John trying to tell us? Why do we start off with water into wine, and we end up with the resurrection from the dead of a guy who's been so dead that they were afraid to roll the stone away because he was already stinking. He was already in a bad state of decomposition. He was deader than dead. There was no chance to get him back. Again, Jewish story that they reckon the soul is around the body for 3 days. That was sort of in Jewish mythology. And that it might sort of jump back into the body and it could rise up again. And but this was well after 3 days or 5 days or something. There was a figure than that, but it was well after this time. And literally he was deader than that, to the point that Jesus even stood at a distance because he was anticipating the smell that was coming from the burial chamber, from the cave. Anyway, why these stories? What is God trying to tell us? What is John trying to tell us with these stories, and how does it apply to our lives? So that might be a really interesting thing, and just let kids, put them into small discussion groups, and let them figure it out what's going on there. And it could be quite amazing what you find, especially if kids are sensitive to the Holy Spirit and they get some wisdom from above, and you might be surprised what you find they're coming up with, stuff you may have never thought about it yourself. And this is after years of walking with the Lord. Right. How far is the east from the west? If you live in Britain, you've got the Greenwich Meridian in a lot of parts of the country. I've got a caravan near the east coast, and the Meridian is literally about 5 minutes away from my caravan. And when I go to the sea, depending which route I take, I go past it. And sometimes I, put my little GPS on my phone, and I drive from the Western Hemisphere to the Eastern Hemisphere. And obviously it's just a thought line, but it might be a thing. If you're in Britain, take the kids to the Meridian. There's a good chance that it's not too far away from you. If you live on the eastern side of Britain, and I have to have a look. I'm not quite sure whether it is all land-based or go through the water. Obviously in London it's possible. You've got the park in Greenwich. I've heard the Meridian is between a park monk and a dustbin or something. But it's there, okay, in the Greenwich Observatory, and then it sort of goes up north. I think it should go through most of the country. This point is not very far away from the coast, and I think if you go further north, it'll actually go into the water, so you can't do this. But it might be worthwhile to take kids on a church trip to the Meridian, and then just have this discussion of far is the east from the west, and then look at the scripture that's dealing with this, and it's dealing with our sin, that God removes it from us as far as the east is from the west. And it could be a good discussion. It's just an idea. You might do it, you might not do it. It might inspire you to look at some other geographic locations which have got some significance. I don't want to use the word pilgrimage, but it is just something, something physical to make kids think about it. Now, if you take them to the signpost and you've got like a 1-minute sermon, and they've been sat on a bus for about an hour to get to this signpost, they're not going to forget the sermon because they physically were there and they have seen the thing. And it gets a bit more interesting as well. I don't think the signpost is in the right position. When I use my GPS, I notice that it's about 100 yards further east where the meridian is. And I think they just put it there by mistake or because it was easy for a car to park there. But yeah, and then the other thing as well is I made photos. Whenever I've got friends come over from abroad, I take them to this point and I make them put 1 foot in the east, 1 foot in the west, and I take the signpost with a photo, and so they were in the east and in the west and so on. So it can be a little bit of fun as well. So might be something for you to look at. Obviously, if you're in America, it's a bit difficult. It's a long way to travel, but again, it's a question as well where you might go to some other point. Right, interesting as well. There's a North Pole and a South Pole, so there's a definitive place where you can identify the North Pole and the South Pole, but there's no East Pole and no West Pole. So wherever you are, East and West are very far away from one another. Okay. This is one of the last slides. It's one more slide to come, but with a lot of things. So one of them is, and I came across a group ages ago, and I'm looking about 20 years ago. I don't remember their name, but they were producing CDs, and they were making music to the Book of Psalms. One of the churches I went to for a number of years, they did the same thing. They just looked at Psalms, and they took some of the text from the Book of Psalms and they put them to music, and they had some very good musicians, and they were singing songs to that. So it was quite good and quite powerful. And if you've got musicians, I'm not a musician, so I can play the guitar, but I'm not very good at it. But if you've got some musicians and people who are very much into music, people who are very melodical, so you might encourage them to, take some psalms and to organize them into some music projects. Okay, Project Mark 16. Yeah, one more. Didn't mention this there. So this is all about gospel. We've got the Great Commission in Mark 16, which is go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And then research ways to communicate the gospel. Yeah, so we've got the old ways, which were done in the 70s and 80s and probably 60s and 50s as well, which is about little paper tracts talking to people about Jesus. And an interesting way as well as gospel coins. You can get some from Living Waters in the States. They're not that expensive. They're made of aluminium, so postage is not that high. There used to be... I'm just trying to think what the ministry is called. There's one here in England as well. It's in the south, and they used to sell gospel coins. Truth something. Let me just check just a moment. And I'm going out on a limb here. I think I've still got one in the pocket. Have I? I might not have. Anyway, they're gospel coins, and there's just like no, I've no longer got them here. And and what you do is you just throw them somewhere, and people obviously they associate a value. They still do this before real money disappears, and we've just got electronic money. They associate a piece of value with that. So what I've used to do is I got like a bunch of these gospel coins, and when I went to work and I went to town to get something to eat or so, I tossed a coin into certain places. And when I came back, the coins were always gone. And people keep hold of them. Yeah. So they don't throw them away, because otherwise you would find them somewhere else or nearby as soon as they realize this is a Christian thing. But they tend to keep them, and you can put some messages out there, like the Ten Commandments, maybe a short gospel message, John 3:16, something like that, and print this on the gospel coin. The sad thing is they're very hard to get hold of. There was this ministry in southern England, and there was like an eBay link, and oh dear, I'm just trying to find out whether I've forgotten the name, but the last thing I heard of them is that they just had one bunch of these coins, and they stopped manufacturing them, and you couldn't get them anymore. But you can still get them from Living Waters in the States, and and that might be one way to get hold of them. I've never seen them. I've read about them, and they're made of aluminium, so a little bit lighter. But I think you can buy them in big batches, and they are not that expensive. Yeah? So it might be something to do. But also you can make your own coins. Long time ago, I had a look in that. For me, it was too expensive to do. But if you've got a backing of a church, it could be a project as well where you get to get a press, and you produce these coins. Yeah? And the expensive thing is you need to get the stencil made, and there are companies in China, I think there's some here in Britain as well, who make those stencils. And so you could get your church team to or your youth group to design the gospel coin, and you're talking quite some money. So you're not looking like 20-30 pounds, but you're looking at hundreds, if not thousands of pounds, or £1,000. You can then get the stencils made from the design the church group has made, the youth group has made. You could then get a press, into the church and press those coins, and then you could just drop them. Maybe have a session where you pray over them, that they go to the people who are open for the gospel and who are ready to accept Jesus in their lives, and then just dish them out. Leave them in places where people are, nightclubs, in town. Give them as change to people, when give them as a present to people, if it's a good design and it's cool and so on. So that might be a project as well, and quite powerful as well. And I was quite surprised. I mean, I'm not sure what the result is, and nobody knows, but it's one way to get a message out, to get the gospel out. Literature as well, so you can buy, for example, Gospels of John for like 10p or something. You can leave books somewhere. You can have a book table as well. I was talking about, at one stage, about, is this the next one? No, it's just for the project. We can have like a book table where you get like secondhand books from the church, people who have read Christian books, which have got a strong message, or you buy some as well. If you listen from Germany, there's a company, a publisher called CLV, CLV.de, so it's CLV.de, and they do some foreign books as well, but they predominantly do German books and a lot of evangelistic books, and some of them, they are just €1 or something, so they're not that expensive, but you could give them out as gifts and give them to people to read, and it might bring them over, it might lead them to Christ. Again, book tables as well. I once did a book table on a market, and it was quite interesting. I didn't get it was just Christian books, and I didn't. I wanted to get a banner done, on the table to let people know what this is all about. So people came, looked at the books, and some of them they stepped back like they're toxic or poisonous. It was quite funny to see. I thought one New Testament, and there was one Christian guy who was quite impressed and thanked me and all that. But again, it is quite interesting that some of the reactions you see, and it can be quite disturbing as well at times. There are little book exchanges, sort of mini libraries. So here in Britain, we've got phone booths which have been turned into a book exchange, and people can pick out books. I'm not sure what's happening now with COVID and all that. So people are maybe a little bit more careful with this. But again, you can just get some Christian books, stick them in there. And people take them or they don't take them. And if they're really angry, they destroy them. But at least there's a reaction. Right, what else have we got? We've got podcasts, very easy to make. You can upload them. There are tons of websites who do podcasts. You can do mini broadcasts. There are those car FM transmitters, and very often they can go through a whole car park, but people don't tune that much for radio stations anymore. They just program them in and that's it. So maybe not that effective. If you are in America, there's this exemption that you can use transmitting equipment on very low power, but they tend to be powerful enough to cover about 100 meters. So there's like a whole house broadcasting, and anyway, there are some transmitters available where you can do this. and it's all perfectly legal, and you can use them. So it might be something for you to get into it as well. But again, just an idea. You can obviously put them up on YouTube, Rumble, and other websites. YouTube videos as well. Testimonies could be interesting. Broadcasts, again, can be interesting. There's always a problem with copyright, and I need to make you aware of this. But if you have your own music, and maybe the Psalms you put to music, maybe with a fancy beat or whatever, you own the copyright to the music. And you can then create broadcasts where you have a little message, maybe a play, a radio play, maybe a testimony or something, with an interlude of music you've produced yourself, and you don't have to worry about copyright issues. Missions as well. You can have local missions, which is probably these days more important if you live in the West, than missions to Africa. There are probably more Christians in Africa, possibly even China, than what we have in Europe or America for that. But again, sort of mini missions you could organize, and you could do with your youth. A project which you pray about, you plan it, you get all the stuff, get the resources together, you execute it, pray about it again, finish the project. Yeah. And again, the big message should always be: it's not about success, but it's about being faithful. And what you are faithful towards is the Mark 16 commission, the Great Commission: go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. We don't need to convert everybody, but we need to preach to everybody. That is really the message we need to get out. Clothing as well, which is interesting as well. So evangelistic clothing, where you've got like John 3:16 message, God so much loved this world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. Something like that printed on a t-shirt. And sometimes it can engage people into conversation, can produce a lot of hatred, but that's what we've been told as well in the Bible. Persecution is a reality. But go into people's face, let them know you are a Christian, and let them know that one day they have to answer to Christ, either as a child of God or as a son of hell. And that is really the option, and this is really the message we need to get out there. And you could maybe produce your own clothing, get t-shirts printed with a message, get t-shirts printed with a logo for the church, little cross, little message, something like that, just to be in people's faith. And faith, not faith, faith, to lead them to faith, TH. So very easy way of being a missionary in this dark age we're living right now. Okay, further project ideas. Local church history. It doesn't matter where you are, I think, and it's probably a daring statement. If you look long enough and deep enough, you will find some very interesting stuff that was going on in your locality, where God has been moving people in the last 2,000 years, where people came to Christ. So that could go right back to the time of the first missionaries coming to your part of the world, to where you are now, and that might be something really interesting to research. I live in Barnsley in England, and I'm not a native of Barnsley. Obviously, I'm from Germany, but Hudson Taylor used to live here, and he was, I know this area reasonably well, and I know a lot of chapels which have been turned into theaters, pubs, all sorts of stuff, but not are used as churches anymore. And Hudson Taylor was preaching in these chapels. And this is something like a Hudson Taylor trail, but there's not much information on this. And one thing, this is a project I would like to pull through myself, and I'm looking for somebody to do it with. But it's just to go and to follow all these churches where Hudson Taylor lived, where he was preaching, where he went to school, sort of a little story of his life in Barnsley before he went to China. And now probably about millions of Christians in China trace their faith back to this one missionary who had the vision to go to a country which was very different to Barnsley. Bearing in mind, Barnsley is very different to England, and it's a very, very, how shall I say, it's a very unique place. Yeah, you don't get a place like Barnsley anywhere in Yorkshire. Yeah, so that's the county where Barnsley is in. And you don't get a place like Yorkshire anywhere in England. It's very unique. It's very, the language is unique. Everything is unique. And then you get these guys, from mining towns here in Barnsley, ending up in China and are doing some great stuff there. Again, you could do a video, and this video would be really interesting to a lot of Chinese Christians, just to see where this guy was coming from. When they study a little bit about their own history and they can trace their faith back to Hudson Taylor. There's also another place as well. Whitby is not far from here. It's still in Yorkshire, isn't it? It's still in Yorkshire, yeah. It's East Yorkshire. And there's Whitby Abbey, and a guy called Cadman was there in Whitby Abbey. And again, there's some story around this, I'm not that sure, but there's still a memorial about Cadman and a pillar which talks about his life. You can still see bits of the cathedral. You can see this pillar. You can see where Cadman was. And some of the scenery, which is in Whitby, it's a very sort of spooky scenery. Most people know it with, I think, the story of Frankenstein or Dracula. Count Dracula, that started in Whitby as well. So most people associate Whitby with Count Dracula. And very few people associate Whitby with Cadman. Yeah, again, a saint, big figure in church history. So you could make like a documentary about Cadman, who he was, look at some of the old images of him, some of the stories of his life, what was life like in those days, look at what is left of this life, and then maybe look a little bit at the landscape and what was going on in Whitby. James Cook, other big characters, they started from Whitby as well. So he discovered Australia and places like that. So it's a little town in the northeast of England, but it's got a lot of history. And there are some saints as well, some people who lived their lives for Christ. And again, I'm sure wherever you are, you find similar people, near where you live or where you live, and you can make a story of those people, a little bit of a presentation, upload it to YouTube, make it available to the rest of the world. And it could be an interesting youth project as well. So get the youngsters to research these characters, find out the story of them, all the information they can get, create something like a blueprint where you've got a big piece of paper, stick all the information on this piece of paper, then create a storyline, and then make them create a film and present this film. And make it a big project. And again, it can be, a film night in the church, can be uploaded, can be of value to other people as well, other churches. And the main thing is it elevates Christianity, it elevates what we stand for, it glorifies the name of Christ, and you can always inject the gospel in the stories of these guys, like Hudson Taylor. Amazing guy, in his lifetime it was just one failure after the other. But in the end, millions of Christians turned to Christ. Not millions of Chinese became Christians and turned to Christ. So get this right. Cadman, I'm not sure about the story. I never really went into his life. It's probably something I should do, and maybe do a project like that myself, or encourage you as the church to take this on board and have a trip to Whitby. Other than it being good fun to be there, and it's quite an interesting place. Very hard to get lost there as well. If you go with a big group, you can always find them. It's just like a few streets in there. But you can, they've got a nice beach as well. They've got nice chip shops, fish shops. Can be an interesting trip, but you can, at the same time, you can also, do a lot about this Cadman guy. You could ask people in Whitby, whether they know about him, and do a little bit of a survey. Film them as well, put a part of your film. Look at all the places where Cadman has been, and make a good time out of it, and then edit a film, publish it, and do it for the glory of God. Gospel projects we talked about. This Bible camp might be an interesting thing to plan it. Maybe a weekend in a youth hostel. Many youth hostels, they've got rooms as well. There's a big youth hostel in Germany called Wewelsburg. Got a history which goes back about 600-700 years. I think fairly well documented, about 500 years. Got some very bad history as well. There used to be a concentration camp in the Nazi times. It's the only triangular castle, I think, in Europe. Yeah. And but they've got a youth hostel there. They've got lecture rooms. You can have display equipment like projectors and stuff like that, which you can rent. Is quite interesting what you can do there. There are a lot of youth hostels in England as well with similar facilities. I'm sure there's a lot of facilities in America as well. And you could have like a Bible camp where you get a theme, possibly, I mean, I know in Whitby there's a youth hospital. You might get your Christian group there, do a film on Cadmon, a documentary on that one. John Wesley, he's been all over the place. Maybe look at what John Wesley was getting up to, where he was, where he preached. Do some films on that. There are a lot of very big personalities, Christian personalities here in England, for the last couple of 100 years, all the way down to possibly going all the way back to about 1,000 years ago and longer. So we talked about this. Gospel bicycle, that's an interesting thing as well. And the idea came when I was in my hometown in Paderborn in Germany. There are a lot of people who've got their bicycles, and they've got like a pedestrianized zone, and a lot of bicycles are parked up there. So they've got like bicycle stands, and people just lock up the bicycles, do their shopping, then they get back on the bicycle, go out, and you see them there when you go into the shopping street and into the high street, the pedestrianized zone. So what you could do is you could just take an old bicycle. You probably gets vandalized, so that's the reason why I say don't take like a 1,000-pound bicycle. But have a look and you could do this as a youth project. Number one, you do a collection, so you may get 20 pounds, $20 or whatever. Then try and buy a bicycle for this money. Then when the bicycle comes, you put like every surface you've got, you put some advertising on it, gospel advertising, like a Bible verse, John 3:16, for example, or a little explanation how to come to Christ. Maybe a scripture portion or whatever. And if you've got a gentleman's bicycle, you normally have got this bar which goes right at the top, and then it goes down. Then you've got where the pedal is, and it's almost like a triangle. Yeah, it looks like a triangle. And you could put like some cardboard or a piece of wood in this triangle, get some tie wraps, tie it together, and then put a message on this bicycle, and just leave it somewhere for a day. Park it up for a day. If it gets destroyed, you've lost 20 pounds. You don't need a license or anything for this, because all you're doing is you're just relaying a message on a bicycle that belongs to you, which is locked up, legitimately parked somewhere in a high street. People go past it and they have to see what's on there. So that might be one very interesting way to do this. It might be a good project as well. And you might have like a couple of bicycles, do a bit of a contest, repair them, make them roadworthy, and then do some advertising on this. Also the wheel arches, you could cover them up sort of halfway and put some messages on there. And it's not expensive, could be a very interesting project. It's a hands-on approach. There's a lot of planning involved, which you could do with your youth group, and you could use this. I haven't seen them yet, and I've got a lot of projects in my mind, and I never get time to do them. But it might be a really good thing for a youth group to do this, to preach the gospel. And you don't have to, you just do it subtly. People will watch it, they will see it, they will make their mind up, they will reject it. Maybe they will get intrigued and they will get interested. But we're going back to Mark 16, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And you can have like a different verse every week and have this project where you park this bicycle on a Saturday, every Saturday for a month in a certain place in a town, and have a different message on there, leading people to an understanding of the gospel. Okay, research projects, surveys on what people think about biblical themes. So I've once seen a survey on what do people think, where they go when they die. Will they go to heaven? Are they eternal? Or is it just all over? And don't evangelize them at that point. Just get like leading questions and ask them, and maybe if people are open and they wonder where you're from and what it is for, give them like a little tract which explains which church you are from, that you're just interested in finding out what people think about biblical themes, and have a very short message of the gospel at the end of it on this piece of paper. But you could get valuable information. You could see what is going on, what do people really think, what do people think about the church, is the church relevant for today, things like that. And it would also lead you into discussion, how can we make the church more relevant, how can we make biblical truth more real to people. which way do we need to communicate with them? So it could be an interesting project, and it could be something which is worthwhile doing. I talked about the second-hand Christian book table before, so it could be a shop. You could have an auction of, Christian books. You could do this within the church. You could make a little bit of a project out of it, invite non-Christians as well, or people who are sitting on the fence. This is an interesting thing, geocaching. And what it is I'm not sure, I've come across this a few years ago. I'm not sure whether you would know about this. But if you Google it, you'll get geocaching websites, and people leave a message or something, a little present or something, in a little container, and they hide them somewhere in the landscape. Then they write down the coordinates, like in longitude and latitude, and leave it somewhere on a website. And then people go and it's just a little bit of a challenge to find the container, and then you may have a little pencil in there, and you write down your name, and you write down when you found this, and you put it all back in again. I think the idea is whatever gift is in there, you take it out and you put something else in there. So it might be a little ring or a penny or something like that, just a little bit of fun. And anyway, you could latch onto this. You could have a church website where you've got like geocaching around the church. Apparently there are some rules as well where you can and can't leave stuff, or where you need to have permission to leave stuff. So for example, if you work together with some churches and you've got land, you could legitimately use this as a geocaching exercise. Stick it up on a website and people can go there and they can have a look at this. You would know where the geocache is and the little container, and you can make sure that it's always filled up with tracts, gospel coins, or anything like that, and you invite people to take one if they want to. GPS treasure hunting, that could be an interesting exercise as well. So you get one of your team members to hide a lot of treasures somewhere in a landscape. I think the legal thing is if you do this, you need to pick them up later on. You get the coordinates, and then you get a group of people. Just get them out in the open, get them in a forest, or somewhere in a landscape, and make them find a bunch of treasures. Just a little bit of fun, and maybe connected with a bit of a riddle or a message or something like that. They have to put together, and obviously the message can be a biblical message. Creating an interactive map might be interesting as well. So you could create a map online, like a PDF file or something, and when you click on something, you get information of what's taking place there. So again, you could look this up with church history in your region, of who was where, what great personalities did what where, which chapel, and things like that. So again, it's a little bit of a web exercise. Then web projects, so you could have testimony pages, you could have evangelistic information on a web page and get kids to put something together. It could just be informative about your church, about what you do, and so on. Whenever you do your web projects, make sure, and this is the age we're living in, for good or for bad, depends how you look at it, but make sure safeguarding guidelines are adhered by. If you do geocaching, make sure you are within the law. When you do book tables and things like that, and you go in the public, make sure you've got relevant licenses. If you've got church grounds, you can have a book table, especially if the church is facing a main road. And I've seen this as well here in England, where people just put up a little stall and they hand out Christian literature. There was one church which was next door to a supermarket, and people who went to the supermarket could use a public car park, and they would have to go past the church. So they put up a little stall, and they were dishing out Christian literature at this stall. So I mean, things you can do and things you can get into. Otherwise, you need permission from the council. Just make sure that always you stay within the law, and don't make yourself vulnerable by doing things which are against the law. But as I said, like the gospel bike, you can just put it up anywhere. It's just a bicycle. What else? Christian documentaries and radio shows. Make sure you don't fall foul of copyright laws. Gospel coins, you can buy them. Again, you can leave them somewhere, place them in discreet places. Bible camp, interesting thing. And when you do church history, local history, again, make sure with data protection and all that, you don't fall off the law as well. So I know there are different rules in Germany and in England. So sometimes in Germany, I think there may be a problem if accidentally people in the public walk into the picture and you are not an official press outlet. It can get you into trouble. So just make sure it's just you and the church or whatever you want to film, and there are not too many people around there. Especially if you publicize it afterwards, and it's not just for private consumption. Okay, that's it. I hope this helped. This talk was meant to help you with your youth groups and to give you some inspirations. Maybe some of the stuff is relevant to you, and you can do something with it. Obviously, pray about it, whatever you do. Don't just take these ideas and go with them, but pray about them as well. Move them before the Lord, and maybe one or two or maybe three or maybe none of these ideas are for you, but maybe they help you to think of something yourself you can do with your youth group. So I really, really urge you to pray about these ideas. Also think over and above these ideas as well. So these are just a bunch of ideas which I was carrying with me for a long time, and I thought I'm going to make them public, and it might be helpful for one or two of you out there, and you could do something with those ideas. If they work, they work. If they don't work, they don't work. Always think about the Great Commission. We need to sow seeds, and I'm not talking about money or anything like that, but the Word of God into young people's hearts. So, and we don't know, Ecclesiastes says, throw your bread upon the waters, 1 or 3 portions. After many days, you will find it again. So that's a little bit the message I sort of want to get across here. We need to get the Word of God out there, and we need to sow it into people's hearts. And if I look at what people are exposed to, young people are exposed to today through the mass media, the violence, the lies, the immorality, the madness, the sheer madness which is out there, where people try to normalize perversion and other stuff, it is pretty bad, and we need to get youngsters. We at least need to show them an alternative reality, which happens to be the truth, and not this reality of dirt and filth, which is coming through video, through society, even through libraries and books, through television, into our homes. We need to protect our youngsters from that, show them something else, and encourage them to go a different way. Anyway, thank you for listening to this. Feel free to leave some comments. And any of these ideas, I don't, like the Hudson Taylor talk, if you happen to live in this area and you want to do this, go for it. It doesn't belong to me. There's no copyright. There's no ownership or anything on it. You go for it and you make the best of it. And I don't own or claim any rights to any of these ideas. They're yours to take and yours to go with. They're just ideas. That's all they are. And I hope they're going to be of help for you and your youth group. And maybe even, not a youth group, even for, just a bunch of guys, lads and lasses you hang out with to do something for the Lord, which fits within this list. So just go for it. Okay, God bless, and all the best to you. It's been a privilege. Thank you for persevering to this last slide, and I hope this has been helpful. Okay, bye-bye.